There is no horizon, only a narrow field of perception defined by the dim glow of analog instruments and the faint reflection of light against the cockpit glass. Beyond that, nothing. The landscape below is invisible, absorbed entirely into the darkness of a moonless night over South Australia. The aircraft is already in flight. It moves steadily through the air, its engine producing a consistent, unbroken tone. There is no turbulence, no sudden motion, only the quiet continuity of controlled flight. The structure vibrates subtly, a constant reminder of speed and airflow, but otherwise offers no indication of instability. Inside the cockpit, the instruments carry the full burden of awareness. Airspeed holds steady. Altitude appears stable. The artificial horizon presents a level attitude, clean, centered, reassuring. The altimeter unwinds slowly, but not alarmingly. The descent, if present, is controlled, measured. Outside, there is no confirmation, no ground lights, no visible terrain, no separation between sky and earth. The darkness is complete enough that it erases depth itself. Without reference points, distance becomes theoretical. The surface below could be thousands of feet away, or much closer. There is no way to tell from outside alone. The aircraft continues. Its navigation depends entirely on internal systems, radio signals, instrument readings, and procedural memory. Each indication is interpreted in isolation, then assembled into a mental picture of position and motion. But that picture exists only inside the cockpit. It cannot be verified visually. The region surrounding Mount Gambier offers little in the way of natural illumination at night. Sparse settlements, wide stretches of unlit terrain, and the absence of reflective features create an environment where the ground effectively disappears after sunset. Even under clear conditions, the surface provides almost no usable visual cues. Tonight, the effect is total. The aircraft's forward motion continues uninterrupted. The engine maintains its rhythm. The propeller cuts through the air with mechanical precision. Every system appears to be functioning within expected parameters. And yet, a subtle shift begins. It is not abrupt, not dramatic. It does not trigger alarms or immediate concern. The kind of deviation that develops quietly beneath the threshold of perception. A slight change in pitch, a marginal adjustment in power, a descent rate that increases, but only incrementally. On the instruments, the change is visible, but only as specifically observed, interpreted, and cross-checked. In isolation, each indication remains within plausible limits. Nothing presents itself as an obvious failure. The aircraft is still under control, but control depends on awareness, and awareness in this environment is fragile. Without an external horizon, the human vestibular system begins to substitute its own interpretation of motion. The inner ear, deprived of reliable cues, can generate a convincing, but false, sense of level flight. A gradual descent can feel like straight and level. A slight bank can go unnoticed. The aircraft responds only to physical input. It does not correct for perception. It follows commands precisely, regardless of whether those commands are based on accurate understanding or subtle misinterpretation. Inside the cockpit, the workload remains manageable. There are no emergency procedures in progress, no checklist interruptions, no system failures demanding attention. The flight continues as routine, quiet, procedural, controlled. But the absence of difficulty can itself conceal risk, because nothing forces a reassessment. Nothing interrupts the continuity. The descent continues. Outside, the terrain rises gradually in places, rolling elevations that do not announce themselves. There are no ridgelines silhouetted against the sky, no water surfaces reflecting starlight, no urban glow to define altitude, only darkness. The aircraft moves through it, unchanged in appearance, unchanged in sound. but its vertical position is no longer aligned with expectation. The margin between altitude and terrain narrows. Still, there is no visual indication, no warning light, no audible alert. In 1971, there are no onboard systems designed to detect proximity to the ground automatically. No terrain awareness systems. No Sensei's voice warnings. The responsibility remains entirely with the pilot, dependent on instruments, navigation aids, and interpretation. And interpretation, in conditions like these, can drift. The altimeter continues its slow movement. The vertical speed indicator reflects a descent, controlled but present. The artificial horizon remains stable. Each instrument, taken alone, is correct, but together they require continuous correlation, a moment of inattention, a slight delay in cross-checking, a reliance on sensation rather than indication. These are enough. The aircraft continues descending. There is still time. Time to recognize. Time to correct. Time to arrest the descent and restore separation from the unseen ground below. But time is not announced. It passes silently, measured only in distance and altitude. The aircraft moves forward. The darkness remains absolute, and the ground, still invisible, waits just beyond perception. Southern Australia, early 1970s. Aviation at this time exists in a transitional space, technically capable, but still heavily dependent on human interpretation. Aircraft are reliable. Engines are predictable. Navigation systems exist, but they are limited in precision and coverage, particularly outside major routes. Beyond the larger cities, aviation becomes quieter, less structured. Mount Gambier sits in this quieter space. Located in the southeastern region of South Australia, the area is defined not by altitude, but by subtle terrain variation, rolling landforms, volcanic features, and long stretches of open ground. By day, the region is clear and readable. The landscape offers orientation through shape, color, and contrast. At night, those references disappear. 7. There are few concentrated light sources. No dense urban grid. No continuous highway illumination. The terrain does not reflect light in a way that defines edges or elevation. Without moonlight, the ground effectively vanishes. For pilots operating in this region after sunset, the environment becomes abstract. Position is no longer confirmed visually. It must be constructed. The state of regional aviation in 1971. In 1971, aviation infrastructure across Australia is unevenly distributed. Major airports are equipped with established navigation aids, VOR, VHF Army Directional Range, NDB, non-directional beacon, and controlled airspace procedures. But smaller regional areas rely on more basic systems. Navigation often depends on NDB signals, which provide direction but not precise distance. Dead reckoning, using heading, speed, and time. Visual reference, when conditions allow. Instrument flight is possible, but not universally supported with precision approach systems. Many regional airfields do not have advanced landing aids. Pilots must transition between instrument navigation and visual confirmation during arrival. At night, this transition becomes critical, and in areas like Mount Gambier, it is not always reliable. The nature of night flying. Night flying introduces a fundamental shift in perception. During daylight, orientation is continuous. The horizon provides constant feedback. Terrain defines altitude visually. Movement is cross-checked instinctively against the outside world. At night, that system collapses. The horizon may disappear entirely. Ground features lose contrast. Depth perception becomes unreliable. Even under clear skies, the absence of reference points creates a condition known as a black hole environment, a situation where the pilot sees little to no visual indication of terrain ahead. In such conditions, the aircraft can be perfectly controllable, yet poorly understood in terms of position. The responsibility shifts almost entirely to instruments. But instruments require discipline. They must be scanned continuously, interpreted correctly, and cross-referenced. Any lapse, even brief, can allow a small deviation to develop unnoticed. The flight itself, the aircraft involved in the Mount Gambier accident, was engaged in a routine operation. There was no indication at the outset of abnormal conditions. The flight plan, if filed, would have been standard for the route. Weather conditions were not extreme. There were no reports of severe turbulence or storms. The risk did not originate from a single dramatic factor. It emerged from alignment, time of day, geography, system limitations, human perception. The flight progress is expected through its early stages. Departure, climb, and cruise would have been uneventful. Structured phases governed by procedure and habit. The transition toward arrival, however, introduces complexity. As the aircraft moves closer to Mount Gambier, altitude begins to decrease. Navigation shifts from en route guidance to terminal positioning. The pilot must reconcile instrument data with expected visual cues, but those cues may not appear. The surrounding terrain offers no guarantee of visibility. Without sufficient lighting or atmospheric clarity, the ground remains concealed. This creates a dependency loop. Instruments define position. Position determines descent. Descent assumes terrain clearance. Terrain clearance cannot be visually confirmed. If any part of that loop becomes misaligned, the error compounds. Limitations of the era. In modern aviation, aircraft are equipped with multiple layers of protection against terrain collision. Ground Proximity Warning Systems, GPWS. Enhanced Terrain Awareness and Warning Systems, EGPWS. GPS-based navigation with precise altitude mapping. None of these systems existed in operational form in 1971. At that time, there is no automated warning if an aircraft descends dangerously close to terrain. No Sensei's voice alerts. No predictive terrain modeling. The aircraft does not know where the ground is. It only knows its altitude relative to sea level. That distinction is critical. Terrain elevation varies. An aircraft maintaining a safe altitude over flat ground may be at risk over rising terrain, even if the altimeter reading appears acceptable. Without terrain awareness systems, the pilot must mentally integrate charted elevations, position estimates, altitude readings. In darkness, this process becomes increasingly fragile. A quiet convergence. There is no single point in the timeline where risk becomes obvious. Instead, it builds gradually. A descent initiated slightly earlier than intended. A position estimate that drifts. An assumption that visual contact will occur momentarily. A delay in recognizing that it has not. Each element, on its own, is manageable. Together, they begin to align. The aircraft continues toward Mount Gambier. The ground remains unseen, and the conditions necessary for controlled flight begin to erode, not through failure, but through absence. No warning, no interruption, only continuation. Understanding the Mount Gambier accident requires separation before integration. The event itself is singular, but the conditions that produce it are not. They exist across multiple domains: mechanical, human, environmental, and procedural. Each one contributes independently. None, on its own, guarantees an accident. Only when combined do they begin to form a chain. Aircraft. The aircraft is representative of its time. A light, single-engine platform designed for reliability and efficiency rather than redundancy. Its systems are mechanical, direct, and largely unforgiving of misinterpretation. There are no layers of automation, No digital filtering of data. What the instruments display is raw input, altitude, attitude, airspeed, presented through analog gauges that require constant attention. 6. The primary flight instruments include altimeter, indicating height above mean sea level; artificial horizon, attitude indicator, showing pitch and bank relative to a gyroscopic reference; vertical speed indicator, VSI, displaying rate of climb or descent; airspeed indicator, measuring velocity through the air. Each instrument functions independently. None provides a complete picture alone. The altimeter, for example, does not account for terrain elevation. It only reflects altitude relative to a standardized pressure setting. If the underlying terrain rises, the instrument does not change to reflect that risk. The artificial horizon, while stable, depends on gyroscopic integrity and correct interpretation. It shows attitude, not trajectory relative to terrain. The VSI indicates trend, but not consequence. In isolation, all systems can appear normal. In combination, they demand continuous correlation. The aircraft offers no automatic warning if that correlation breaks down. Crew. The pilot operates as the central processing unit. All available data, instrument readings, navigation signals, environmental perception, must be gathered, interpreted, and acted upon in real time. In a single pilot operation, there is no division of workload, no cross-check from a second crew member, no independent verification of interpretation. Everything depends on one continuous chain of attention. Experience plays a role, but experience does not eliminate vulnerability. Night flying, particularly over low visibility terrain, introduces conditions where human perception becomes unreliable. The vestibular system, the inner ear, can generate convincing illusions of motion. A gradual descent may feel like level flight. A slight bank may go undetected. These sensations are not errors in judgment. They are physiological responses. To counter them, pilots are trained to rely on instruments rather than sensation. But that reliance requires discipline, consistent scanning, cross-checking, and prioritization of data over instinct. Even a brief lapse can allow perception to override indication. Fatigue, familiarity with the route, or expectation of visual contact can all reduce vigilance subtly. Not enough to trigger concern, but enough to delay correction. In such environments, errors do not announce themselves. They accumulate quietly. Environment. The environment surrounding Mount Gambier at night is not hostile in the conventional sense. There are no storms, no severe turbulence, no extreme weather forcing immediate response. Instead, the risk is defined by absence. 7. No visible horizon, no terrain definition, minimal ground lighting, low contrast between sky and surface. This creates a black hole environment where the aircraft appears suspended in a void with no external cues to confirm altitude, attitude, or distance from the ground. Under these conditions, visual flight references are effectively removed. The pilot cannot look outside to verify instrument readings. There is no external contradiction if the aircraft begins to deviate. The environment does not resist error. It conceals it. Terrain in the region is not mountainous, but it is not uniformly flat. Gradual elevation changes can reduce clearance without obvious indication. Without visual cues, these changes are undetectable from the cockpit. The aircraft can descend safely for several minutes, until it cannot. Systems. The broader aviation system in 1971 provides structure, but not comprehensive protection. Navigation aids such as NDBs offer directional guidance, but they are subject to signal distortion, atmospheric interference, and limited precision. They indicate bearing, not exact position. There is no GPS, no moving map, Position must be estimated through a combination of signal interpretation, timing, and heading. Air traffic control, where available, provides separation and general guidance, but does not monitor terrain clearance continuously, especially in regional airspace. Most critically, there is no ground proximity warning system, GPWS. This absence defines a boundary of safety. Modern aircraft continuously calculate the relationship between altitude and terrain, issuing alerts when descent becomes unsafe. In 1971, that calculation exists only in the pilot's mind. If altitude is misjudged, there is no backup. If descent continues unchecked, there is no automated intervention. The aircraft will not warn. It will comply. Convergence. Each element, aircraft, crew, environment, and system, remains individually functional. The aircraft is mechanically sound. The pilot is capable and trained. The weather is stable. The navigation systems are operational. There is no single failure. But alignment does not require failure. It requires overlap. A descent initiated under the assumption of sufficient altitude. An environment that provides no visual contradiction. Instruments that are correct, but not cross-checked in time. A system that offers no external warning. Together, these conditions form a pathway, not abrupt, not obvious, but continuous. The aircraft remains under control. The flight continues as intended, and the margin between expectation and reality begins to narrow, quietly, without indication. The transition is gradual. There is no clear moment where routine becomes risk. No single input that defines a beginning of error. The aircraft continues along its intended path, descending in preparation for arrival. The instruments remain active. They do not fail. They present information continuously, altitude, attitude, rate of descent, each parameter accurate in isolation. The system is functioning as designed, but the interpretation of that information begins to drift. The aircraft is now in the terminal phase of flight. Altitude is being reduced deliberately. The descent profile appears controlled. The vertical speed indicator shows a steady rate, neither excessive nor unstable. Power settings are consistent with approach configuration. Nothing suggests urgency. Nothing demands immediate correction. Outside, the environment remains unchanged. Darkness, no horizon, no identifiable ground features. The expected transition from instrument reference to visual confirmation does not occur, and yet the descent continues. Navigation at this stage depends on estimated position. The aircraft is believed to be at a distance where descent is appropriate. The pilot's mental model, constructed from time, heading, and radio navigation, places the aircraft safely above terrain, aligned with the intended approach path. But that model is no longer exact. Small deviations accumulate. A minor heading variation early in the flight. A slight discrepancy in wind estimation. A delay in position update. Individually insignificant. Collectively, enough to shift the aircraft's actual position relative to where it is believed to be. The difference is not large, but it is critical. The altimeter continues to unwind. It reflects altitude above sea level, not clearance above terrain. If the ground below is higher than anticipated, the margin reduces silently. No instrument indicates this directly. No system calculates the difference. Only continuous cross-checking between charted elevation, estimated position, and altitude can maintain awareness. In this moment, that cross-checking is incomplete. The descent rate increases slightly, not sharply, not enough to trigger concern, but enough to accelerate the closure rate between aircraft and ground. The vertical speed indicator reflects the change. The information is present, but attention is divided. Navigation, configuration, expectation, all compete for cognitive bandwidth. The absence of visual confirmation reinforces the assumption that it will appear shortly, that the runway environment or surrounding lights will emerge from the darkness. They do not. The aircraft continues forward. Altitude decreases. Terrain rises gradually beneath it, imperceptible from above. There is still no external reference, no light, no texture, no indication of proximity. At this stage, the margin is no longer theoretical. It is finite, measured in seconds. The artificial horizon remains stable. The aircraft is not in an unusual attitude. There is no loss of control, no stall, no structural failure. The flight remained controlled, in aerodynamic terms, but control without awareness does not ensure safety. A final opportunity exists, a moment where a single correction, an increase in power, a pitch adjustment, a reassessment of altitude, would restore separation. But recognition does not occur in time, because there is no trigger, no warning, no visual cue, no abrupt deviation, only continuation along a path that is no longer safe. The aircraft descends below the minimum safe altitude for the terrain it is over. This threshold is not marked in the cockpit. It exists only in charts and calculations, external to the immediate moment. Without reference to those calculations, the threshold passes unnoticed. Ground remains invisible until the final seconds. There is no gradual emergence, no clear outline forming in the distance, only a sudden proximity that does not allow for recovery. The aircraft, still under control, still stable in attitude, continues its descent into terrain. There is no evasive maneuver recorded, no abrupt change in trajectory, no indication of late-stage correction. The sequence ends not with loss of control, but with absence of awareness. The motion stops, abruptly, without warning. Silence follows. The sight is located by absence before it is confirmed by sight. When contact with the aircraft is lost, there is no immediate indication of what has occurred. No distress call has been recorded. No deviation from expected communication procedures has been reported. The aircraft has simply ceased to respond. Search efforts begin with uncertainty. The last known position is approximate, derived from expected routing, estimated timing, and limited communication data. There is no precise tracking record, no continuous radar history covering the final segment of flight, only a narrowing of possibilities. Recovery teams move into the region surrounding Mount Gambier. The terrain offers little resistance to access, but it provides few visual clues from a distance. There is no large debris field visible from the air, no fire visible at range. The aircraft, having impacted under controlled flight conditions, is located relatively close to its projected path. The discovery confirms what the absence of communication had already suggested. The aircraft did not divert. It did not attempt to escape deteriorating conditions. It remained on course. Wreckage examination. Initial examination of the site provides critical orientation. The distribution of debris, the angle of impact, and the condition of structural components all indicate a high-energy collision with terrain while the aircraft remained under control. There is no evidence of in-flight breakup, no indication of fire prior to impact, no structural failure that would have prevented continued flight. The aircraft was intact. Its systems were, to the extent determinable, functional. 6. The orientation of the wreckage suggests a controlled descent at the moment of impact. Not a steep dive, not a stall, but a flight path consistent with normal approach parameters, extended beyond safe limits. This distinction is essential. It shifts the focus of the investigation away from mechanical failure and toward operational factors. Instrument and system analysis. Recovered instruments, where readable, do not indicate catastrophic malfunction. There is no clear evidence of instrument failure leading to erroneous readings. The altimeter, attitude indicator, and other primary instruments are examined for pre-impact discrepancies, but no definitive fault is identified that would have misled the pilot significantly. Navigation equipment is also reviewed. NDB signals, while inherently imprecise, are not shown to have failed outright. However, their limitations are acknowledged: susceptibility to signal distortion, limited accuracy in position fixing, and dependence on correct interpretation. There is no single system failure that explains the accident. Instead, the systems function within their known constraints. Flight path reconstruction. Investigators reconstruct the aircraft's likely trajectory using available data. Estimated departure time, intended route, ground speed assumptions, fuel endurance, wreckage location. From this reconstruction, a pattern emerges. The aircraft appears to have descended below a safe altitude before reaching a position where visual reference or confirmed alignment with the airfield could be established. The descent was premature, not dramatically so, but sufficiently to reduce terrain clearance below safe limits. This descent, combined with a lack of visual cues, created a condition where the aircraft's proximity to the ground was not recognized in time. Human factors assessment. Attention tones to the pilot. There is no indication of incapacitation, no evidence of medical emergency, no sign of intentional deviation. The pilot is assumed to have been operating normally, within expected cognitive and physical limits. But normal operation does not eliminate vulnerability. Investigators consider the effects of night conditions without horizon reference, spatial disorientation, workload during approach phase, reliance on estimated position rather than confirmed visual cues. These factors do not produce abrupt errors. They produce gradual misalignment, a descent that feels appropriate, an altitude that seems efficient, an expectation that visual confirmation will occur momentarily. Absence of warning systems. One of the most significant findings is not what failed, but what did not exist. There was no onboard system capable of alerting the pilot to the aircraft's proximity to terrain. No auditory warning, no visual alert, no automated intervention. 6. The concept of ground proximity warning systems would emerge later, developed specifically to address accidents of this nature, where controlled aircraft descend into terrain without awareness. In 1971, the absence of such systems is standard, but in hindsight, it becomes a defining vulnerability. Official conclusion. The investigation concludes that the accident resulted from controlled flight into terrain. The aircraft was airworthy. The pilot was competent. The environment was stable. But the combination of night conditions, lack of visual reference, premature descent, limitations in navigation accuracy, absence of terrain warning systems, created a situation where the aircraft's altitude relative to terrain was misjudged. There is no singular cause, only a sequence, each step logical within its own context, each contributing to an outcome that was not recognized until it was irreversible. Industry impact. At the time, such accidents are not isolated. They occur across different regions, aircraft types, and operations, sharing a common pattern. Controlled aircraft, functioning normally, flown into terrain due to loss of situational awareness. The Mount Gambier accident becomes part of this broader pattern. Its significance lies not in unique failure, but in representational clarity. It illustrates how easily controlled flight can transition into unintended descent when external references are removed and system support is limited. The investigation does not produce immediate technological change, but it contributes to accumulating evidence that will later drive the development of terrain awareness systems, improved approach procedures, enhanced pilot training for night and instrument conditions. The impact is gradual, but persistent. The sequence ends quietly, not with a question, but with an answer already formed, one that would only become clear through reconstruction, analysis, and time. The aircraft did not fail in a conventional sense. It responded precisely to input. It remained aerodynamically stable until the final moment. What failed was alignment between altitude and terrain, between perception and reality, between expectation and verification. In the years following accidents of this nature, aviation begins to confront a recurring pattern. Aircraft, fully functional pilots, trained and capable, weather manageable, and yet impact, not because control was lost, but because awareness was incomplete. This distinction becomes central. It shifts the focus of safety away from purely mechanical reliability and toward the integration of human perception, system design, and environmental limitation. The evolution of terrain awareness. By the early 1970s, the industry has accumulated enough evidence to recognize controlled flight into terrain as a distinct and persistent risk category. The response is not immediate, but it is deliberate. 6. The development of ground proximity warning systems, GPWS, emerges directly from this recognition. These systems are designed to monitor the relationship between aircraft altitude, descent rate, and terrain closure. Unlike earlier instrumentation, GPWS does not rely solely on pilot interpretation. It evaluates, it compares, and when necessary, it warns. A voice alert, a tone, a command. Pull up. This represents a fundamental shift. Responsibility is no longer carried exclusively by the pilot's continuous awareness. It is supported by a system designed to detect precisely the kind of misalignment that defined accidents like Mount Gambier. Procedural reinforcement. Technology alone is not the solution. Procedures evolve alongside it. Pilots are trained to recognize the limitations of perception, particularly in night environments where visual references are unreliable or absent. Instrument scanning techniques are refined. Cross-checking becomes more structured, more disciplined. Minimum safe altitudes are emphasized, not as abstract chart values, but as absolute boundaries that must not be breached without confirmed visual conditions. Approach procedures become more standardized. Descent profiles are defined with greater precision. Ambiguity is reduced wherever possible. The human element. Despite technological advancement, the human role remains central. No system eliminates the need for interpretation. No instrument replaces judgment. But the understanding of human limitation becomes more explicit. Spatial disorientation is no longer treated as an anomaly. It is recognized as an inherent risk, predictable under certain conditions, manageable only through strict adherence to instrument reference. The expectation shifts. Pilots are not expected to feel the aircraft correctly in darkness. They are expected to distrust sensation when it conflicts with indication. This is not intuitive. It is trained, a quiet influence. The Mount Gambier accident does not stand alone in prompting these changes. It exists within a sequence of similar events, each contributing data, each reinforcing the same conclusion. Together, they shape the direction of safety evolution, not through visibility, but through accumulation. Present-day contrast. Modern aircraft operate within a layered safety environment. Terrain awareness systems continuously map the aircraft position relative to the ground. GPS provide precise location data, updated in real time. Cockpit displays integrate multiple sources into a single, coherent picture. Automated alerts intervene when thresholds are approached. The margin for undetected descent has been significantly reduced. Not eliminated, but reduced. 7. The environment outside may still be dark. The terrain may still be invisible. But the aircraft now knows where it is in relation to the terrain and communicates it clearly. Closure. The accident near Mount Gambier does not end with impact. It continues through the systems that follow, through procedures rewritten, through training adjusted, through technology developed in response to patterns that could no longer be ignored. There is no single lesson, only a reinforcement of principles. That control is not enough, that awareness must be continuous, the absence of light, of reference, of warning, can be as consequential as failure. The night remains unchanged. Darkness still removes a horizon. Terrain still offers no indication of its presence. But the way aviation responds to that darkness has been altered, incrementally, permanently. The aircraft in 1971 had no way to know. Those that followed do.